Well, you heard the monologue. Honestly, I can barely express the contempt I have for these international demonstrations. It was very interesting last week. The two issues that seemed to really motivate people were Marineland. You had one little idiot with a sign saying Marineland equals death camp. No, death camp is where people in Cambodia or Nazi Germany or Stalinist Russia were murdered. Marineland is an aqua zoo. And then Pussy Riot. These people went into a cathedral because they wanted to cause a problem. They committed an offence. They broke the law. I think they should get a suspended sentence. That's what I think, a fine and suspended sentence, not 2 years in prison. However, the way the world reacted. Rick McGinnis writes some wonderful stuff for various newspapers and blogs, really gets under the skin of the culture, I believe. I mean, there's a context to this. We've seen some translations of Pussy Riot in that very, very bad punk rock. They also call the parishioners, well, they call them shit.
They did?
Yeah.
Because that didn't come out.
That was there. They were told they could, people said, why don't you protest outside the house of the patriarch? They have a problem with the patriarch. They said, no, we'll go into the cathedral. The patriarch isn't there. In front of these people. They were praying, pretending to pray, which was very humiliating to the worshippers. The same people committed public sex, of course, in a museum. They went into a supermarket and one of them masturbated with a chicken leg. I'm sorry, but this is what they did.
Oh, it's more than that.
Yeah, it was. I mean, a chicken leg, darling, if you're going to do that.
Most of a chicken.
Most of the chicken.
Yeah,
well, you've got to admire the effort, I suppose. Yeah. So they want the attention, they want the reaction. Something else, sorry, but I'm taking up too much time, but this has to be said, because there's a lot of ignorance out there. When the Soviets took power in 1917, in the 1920s, there was something which was very noticeable. The Young Communist League, the youth movement of the Communist Party, they would run into cathedrals and perform performance art, and they would humiliate Christians, which led very quickly in the late 1920s to the mass persecution of Christianity. Millions of Christians were murdered, cathedrals were closed down. The Russians remember this. There's a context to why they're reacting strongly to these idiots doing what they did.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's something that seems to escape these young people in this, I mean, I even feel silly saying it, Pussy Riot, this band.
Well, Pete Townsend, he's 105 years old. He was protesting too.
Well, you know, it seems relevant to these people. I mean, they're a ready-made cause célèbre. If you want to be on the side of rebellion and youth, this thing just comes up, you know, it's handed you on a platter. You don't have to look at it too much. You don't have to really question it. You don't have to wonder about it. You can just, you know, throw your hat into the ring in support. And that's about it. I mean, but the question is, has anybody actually ever listened to their music? Just curiously. Because I know a bit about hardcore punk. And anybody listen to the music? Did you bother going?
Only when they were in the cathedral.
Yeah.
And
I was in the cathedral. They were lip syncing.
Yeah.
They were not even like playing. They brought I think they brought a little boom box. That's the thing. They're awful. They are a terrible, terrible band. Nobody I know who's into hardcore punk bought any records by this band. They had no presence whatsoever as a band. They're just sort of this art collective whose whole reason, basically, you remember ACT UP back in the 80s?
Sure.
ACT UP did something similar. They used to invade Catholic churches and perform their, protests.
Not only that, they chained themselves to pews. They threw condoms at kids who were worshipping in a Catholic church. They were lovely. Yeah.
It was repulsive. But the thing is, though, I mean, even for me at the time, and at that time I was outside the church. I considered myself a liberal person. I think that spectacle did quite a bit to make me question the motivations of the people who I supposedly was supposed to be on the side of. That's the thing. When you see something this tasteless, this needlessly provocative, this provocative without any brains behind it, that's the problem with it. It's just astounding to me that it's gotten the traction that it has.
Well, the Orthodox Church in Russia has said, please be gentle with them. They have 2 years, they might not serve that time. Putin, whatever people think of him, and I'm not a fan of the Russian government, but in this case, they wouldn't go to a mosque and do that.
No.
Now, in Iran, for example, where there is a need to fight back, I mentioned where gay men are publicly hanged, where women are stoned to death, go into a mosque and do this, but you know they wouldn't because there'd be severe consequences, and probably there wouldn't be much of a demonstration.
Rebels always go for the soft target,
Of course they do.
That's the thing.
But shouldn't we know better? I mean, I know it's laughable. Warren Kinsella keeps telling us he has a punk band. Never quite heard of them. Nobody has. However, he's leading a demonstration. They're selling T-shirts and Pussy Riot. And what are they fighting for? There are many Russians who want a more liberal, secular nation. They're working very hard, trying to get into the Duma. They're writing newspapers. being a newspaper editor, being a journalist in Russia can be very dangerous. This isn't danger. They've got to, so they'll spend a bit of time in prison, they'll be international celebrities.
Yes. You're English, so I've heard. Do you happen to remember a band called Crass?
No.
They were second-wave English punk band. They weren't even really punks. They're actually old hippies who sort of reconstituted themselves under the punk banner, anarchy, the whole thing.
Yeah.
They remind me remarkably of this art collective that seems to have come under this rubric, Pussy Riot. I said it again. I feel so silly when I do. It's very similar. The music is crap. The politics are muddled and are basically contained on a T-shirt. And they really... are literally, I mean, they will be nothing more than a footnote. Unfortunately, we're living through the footnote right now. And that's one of the worst things about these kind of incidents, is when you know you're dealing with something pathetic and inconsequential compared to the real issues. I mean, Russia as a country has to deal with, very real terrorism.
Yes, it does.
Domestic terrorism on its own soil.
Yeah, and also, do we not, as good liberals, resent this cultural imperialism? Who are we to tell the Russians how they should behave? For goodness sake, Rick, it's always a great pleasure. Thank you so very much indeed.
Michael.